Now I feel like I need to reintroduce you, Jen.
I'm okay to go because I'm going to go over some of it in my talk anyhow.
Great. So. Take it away, Jen.
Okay. My name is Jen Cihla, as Sandy already said. I am currently working as a technical consultant at GlideFast Consulting, which used to be Cloudhires here in Cincinnati. We recently just went through a merger. We are a ServiceNow provider. For those of you who don't know what ServiceNow is, it's essentially a workflow platform. However, I actually have a background in theater and art education, which by that bio, I'm sure was also pretty obvious. I started my career as a costume designer and then went back and got my teaching certificate for art education. When I decided that I didn't want to do either of those anymore, I was really struggling to find something that would give me the ability to take what I loved from those careers and find a new way to use my skills, which is where software development came into play. I love building things with things, and I've always learned best by actually doing things. However, I didn't really know how that was going to translate into software development. And I also wasn't really sure if that was exactly what I wanted to do. So I did lots of research and I found Codecademy. I loved going through Codecademy. It was a great experience. They taught the basics and completely held your hand through the whole process. I thought it was amazing, which is why I decided that that was the path that I wanted to go down. Being a teacher, I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to school for this. Then I started to look at the cost of some of that and went, okay, that's just not happening. That's not an option right now. The other thing that I also found was that because I chose not to go back to school, I got stuck in this lovely little tutorial land where I wasn't necessarily really retaining information, but I was able to go through the tutorials. It was kind of one of those, I'm getting something out of it, but not quite getting everything that I needed through it all. However, once I went through all of those tutorials on Codecademy, I happened to randomly find a meetup for Girl Develop It one night, and I noticed that they were having this intro to HTML and CSS class, and I signed up for it immediately. And that face-to-face interaction was probably what started to change things for me. One of the things that I loved about that face-to-face class was that, again, it gave you the basics, but this time you were given assignments. So you had to actually do something to prove that you understood what was happening in those courses. Those hands-on assignments were really a game changer for me. And after completing a few of those classes, I thought I was ready to finally get my first development job. But it was still really scary. I knew how green I was and that I still had so much to learn. However, I'm really, really glad that I took that leap. I started to work as a full stack developer for a small startup back in 2018. And this is probably where I learned most of my skills as a developer. There were things that I had never been exposed to before. For example, writing unit tests. I'd never written one before, and all of a sudden they were asking me to write one, and I went, sure, I can do that. I don't know how, but sure, I can do that. Very interesting experience. Learned a lot. I had also never maintained a static website before. I didn't have a lot of experience with Git and GitHub. I had never had to jump into someone else's code base and try to make any sense of it or make changes to the code base. I was excited and overwhelmed all at the same time. However, I'm so grateful for that experience. I learned a lot about development. I also learned a lot about myself from that job. Once I started that job, I also began to realize that I probably should have gotten more hands-on learning experiences before getting into that position. I really wish that I had gone and done my learning process in a little bit more of a different fashion. So here are my suggestions for creating hands-on learning experiences while trying to teach yourself software development. First one, decide if you want to be front-end, back-end, or full stack. I suggest having an understanding of both so you know how everything is connected, but then concentrating on front end or back end unless you know you want to be a full stack developer. Do 1 or 2 tutorials for a language, but don't get stuck in tutorial land. Find resources that will give you as close to a real world experience as possible if there are certain things you don't want to have to think about. For me, I didn't want to have to think about business requirements. So I wanted to find resources that would give me the business requirements when I was trying to learn something. It took a big pressure off of me to not have to think about those things. The other one is kind of obvious, but I'm still going to say it. Just build stuff. One thing that I started to do was find a website that I thought was absolutely awful and work on recreating it. I didn't ever have to show the company, but it gave me the opportunity to use the skills that I was learning and get a better understanding of how they actually work, and the opportunity to build something to be able to put into GitHub and show people if they wanted examples of my work. Things that are important when you are taking on new projects. Understand your experience level. Know when to ask for help. Not being shy about what you don't know. Also, time cap things. It's not a good idea to stay stuck on the same thing for too long. I know most people recommended to me to ask questions after about 15 to 30 minutes. For me and the way I learned that about 45 minutes to an hour was a little bit better for me. Once you do find that first job, be prepared to find out what you forgot to learn on your own. Also, continue to learn new skills. I personally believe that the minute something starts to become easy is the minute that I know I'm ready for a new challenge. A great test of how well you actually know something is also having to explain it to somebody else. I suggest doing that even if you don't think you need to, because you're going to find something out about what you do know and what you don't know, and how to actually phrase things to somebody who has no understanding of what you're doing. Also, some of the resources that I found particularly helpful were things like Codecademy, Free Code Camp, Front End Mentor, which I'm going to explain a little bit just because I found out that some people don't know what Front End Mentor is. But it is essentially a big repository of projects that range from beginner, intermediate to hard, and it's all front end designed. It'll give you all of the business requirements that you need, but you don't have to, and you're not told what languages to build them in. So it's here's the project, you get to build it, and you can build it any way you want. The two other resources that I would suggest are Udemy and then Dev Challenges. Dev Challenges is similar to Front End Mentor, except for they have projects for front end and back end. So basically my key takeaways are: start with a tutorial, move on from the tutorial to some sort of real world like experience. Also, find a community. I think that is extremely important. When you are first learning out, sometimes you can get stuck and feel like you are all alone in a situation where you don't need to be alone. And the community is a big part of helping you build your confidence and your skills. Also, know where you're at and take on challenges so you can continue to learn and grow.
That was great. We're going to go ahead and open the floor up for questions, but I have a couple to start with here. First of all, I love that when you talked about unit testing and when they asked you if you could do it, you were like, yes, I can, even though inside you were going, oh my God, no, I can't. Can you tell us a little more about how you learned more about unit testing?
So one of the things that was helpful for me in that particular instance was other people already had unit tests written in the program. So I was able to look at what somebody else had done and be like, oh, okay, so like this is what's happening in this part of the code, and this is how I write the test to make sure that it's doing what it needs to do. Also, the first one that I wrote, I think I ended up needing to have somewhere between like 6 to 7 tests on it. I didn't when I started, I wrote one and then went, okay, I think I got this one going, and then built from there. So like I took baby steps with that unit test.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I
Yes.
think you have to
I
take
also
baby
asked
steps.
for help.
With that too. So in your journey, did you find that it was really hard to ask for help?
In certain situations,
Yeah,
I think is probably the best answer to that.
yeah.
My first job, I worked with a really good group of people. And I would say 90% of the time, I was never afraid to ask a question. Even the ones that I was like, hey, I know I should know this. Can you tell me anyhow? Like, I just like, I need to move forward. And yeah. Or like, can you tell me what to Google so I can figure it out myself? Because clearly there's a chunk here that I'm missing.
Sure.
So,
And you mentioned like to always be in learning mode. Once you get something down, to keep on learning. What are you currently learning?
I have gone back and tried to relearn React.
Oh,
I did a project at one point where I was trying to refactor our static website into React. And I worked on it for maybe 2 or 3 months, maybe a little bit longer than that. But we decided not to use the refactoring and stick with our current site. So I got my hands wet in it and then lost all of it. And I feel like React is one of those things where it's really powerful if you can understand how to use it. So I've been trying to go back and relearn React.
okay. And I'm assuming, like as you said, like you're not using React in your daily job. I personally find it hard to like do my daily job and then focus on learning something else in the evening. Like that is hard. Do you have any hints or tips for that, or just like pure perseverance?
I time cap it. I really
That's
do.
good.
I kind of looked at my day and went, this is how many hours I am willing to put in my day. And when I get home from work, I feel like for me, for who I am, like I need to keep learning because that's the stuff that I love to do. But I really only am willing to put in an extra 30 to 60 minutes a night trying to learn something new. And on the weekends when I have time, I'll put in more because it's fun to me. Like it's not work. Like that's fun. But I definitely during the week, if I'm going to do it during the week, I have to time cap it because I'm a very strong believer in work-life balance. And sometimes when you are developing all day, the last thing you want to do at the end of your day is pick up more code, even if it's in a different language than what you're currently working in. So the time capping has definitely helped with that.
Yeah, that's a good call out. All right. Does anybody else have any questions for Jen?
Have you ever told a company that you think their website is terrible and that you rewrote it?
No. I don't have to think about that one. No. The point is more for my learning, not to school them. I don't think that, I feel like that's crossing a line to me.
Oh, that's hysterical. All right. Well, thanks, Jen. We appreciate your talk. It was so informational. Thank you so much. Now we will move on to our next talk. And next up, we have LeeAnne. LeeAnne Galioto loves to learn and make things. She's been playing with code since elementary school, but it wasn't until she built her first website from scratch that she realized she could go from hobbyist to professional. 6 years ago, she put her skills to work and went from opera singer, yes, that is opera singer, to front-end developer, first in freelance and now as a software engineer at Kroger on the API developer marketplace. She still loves performing as well as teaching, nerding out over learning new things, and despite being a slow runner, she continues to sign up for races. Heck yes. So I'm going to turn it over to LeeAnne, who is going to talk to us about making sense of CSS.
Awesome. Thank you. I think I'm sharing my screen. Is that?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, today I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite languages, CSS. I love building out the structure of a web page and turning content into something wonderful on the screen. But from working with devs who aren't as familiar with it, I know that there are things that can frustrate and confuse people about it. So this talk's going to cover some of the basics and help you the next time you're not sure what's happening with your code. So first, we're going to do a quick refresher of some vocabulary. You have a selector and you have a declaration, basically what you want to style and how you want to style it. You can further break down your declaration into a property and a value, but for today, our selector is really going to be the most important part. So which rule wins? One thing that can really trip people up is the principle of cascade. So cascades in the name of the language, cascading style sheets. And that means that the order of styles matters. So if you have two styles of equal weight, the last one wins. So I have here some HTML, it's some headings, some paragraph tags. And so if we said that we want our paragraphs to all be color red, and then either right away or further down in our style sheets, we said paragraph tags are all going to be color blue. When I refresh this page, you're going to see they're all blue because this was an equal weight and it's the last one. And so that one's going to win. Now, why do I point out equal weight? Well, because specificity also matters, how specific your selector is. So if instead of this example, you can see most of my paragraph tags, they're just plain. But then I have this one, it has a class of my class on it. So this is where you can see it in our code. What color am I? So if I said I want my class to be color purple, and then later I was like, I want all my paragraph tags to be color orange, what's going to happen? Well, as you can see now, most of my paragraph tags are orange, but this one has a more specific selector on it. So this one's going to win for this particular paragraph, and it's going to be purple. So type selectors are the most generic. That's anything that's an HTML element, in this case, the paragraph selector. Next are class selectors. You can also combine selectors if you want to get more specific on what you're targeting. So it can be overwhelming. So it's helpful to think about this as a matrix. It's developer Estelle Weil. She created this amazing visualization called Specificity. And not only is it punny, it is helpful. And she used plankton to be our most generic styles or selectors. So these are type selectors. Then fish are class selectors, attribute selectors, pseudo classes, and then the next level are ID selectors, and those are sharks. Now, a quick note about IDs. In modern CSS, really only use IDs for functionality. I've never needed to use an ID for style. So this is kind of for academic purposes, and you can think about it in the grid. So she has one type selector here, and then 2 type selectors is more specific. She has 12 that's even more specific. You could even have 100, which would definitely be overkill. But if you only need one class selector to override all of those other type selectors, all of those less specific ones. And you can see this example again down here where she has one ID selector completely overrides these 10 class selectors. It's just, and you can look at these numbers at the bottom. These are her matrix. Then you have the inline styles, and they're completely overriding everything that comes before it, anything in your style sheets. It's one of the many reasons why some people really don't like inline styles. And then if you want the nuclear option, you have the important rule. Now, I want to caution you against reaching for an important rule. Maybe you have a very specific case, like you're creating a utility library, or you're needing to overwrite something that's imported or an inline style that you can't get to or change in another way. But why avoid it? I mean, it looks like it's going to be so easy. It's just going to make your life wonderful and override and be fast. But the problem is, since the only thing that overrides an important tag is an important tag, is at some point you're going to need one and another one and another. And then you're back to dealing with Cascade and specificity, and they all have the same weight. And really, that's where you should have started in the first place. So talked a lot about several different things. So how do we write good CSS? How do we make our lives easier for our team? How do we reduce tech debt? You know, the holy grail. So since type selectors are our most generic selectors, it's a good idea to start with those in our style sheets and just kind of put the specificity and the cascade together. Generally, you'll start with something that's targeting your HTML and body. Then with your type selectors, maybe you have things like base styles for your buttons or lists or tables, things that are going to be across all of your components. And then you might have your utilities. So utilities are small classes that just do one thing. So in this case, I have this max width 50%. Also, so think about what you want to name it. You don't want to have MW50, max W50, and max width 50 all in your code, all doing the same thing. If you are consistent with naming it and your team is consistent with naming it, it's going to be easier to use and easier to find later. So next in your code, you might add some specialized classes or component styles. Again, choose names that are going to help you to know what it is that you're targeting, what you're working on, grouping them all together so that you can find everything all in one place. So if you need to figure out what's going on or you need to add something later, you know where it goes. So if you can't fit all that into your name, use a comment. I really like starting my different sections with comments because it's easier to find. It's going to save you a lot of time. And I really can't underestimate how helpful good comments can be in your CSS. I know people feel one way or the other about comments, but in CSS, it can be great if you add a comment about why you added a particular property. Maybe you're needing to fix a browser bug, or you needed a calc function because of whatever you were solving wasn't going to be solved. It was the best way. You can even link to documentation if it'll help you remember, or to teach somebody else on your team what the heck is going on there. It's easy to forget, remove the code, and then you reintroduce a bug that you've already spent the time and solved. Keep your breakpoint styles in the same section as the rest of your code for the component. There used to be a trend where you would move all your breakpoint styles into one spot, but you want to be able to look in a section and be like, this is everything that's happening for this one thing here. I code mobile first, so I put the styles that go across all sizes first, and then I add my breakpoints in order, smallest screens followed by larger screens. And if you think you need to create a new class, just check and see if it exists. A quick search is going to save you some time later, even if it feels like a pain. All right. Thank you all ready. We're going to now answer a frequent interview question. What is the box model? So the box model, it's not scary, has a couple main ideas to keep in mind. First of all, every element's a box. Even if it has rounded corners, if it looks like a circle, it's actually a box. And then how do elements behave? Are they inline or are they block? And how do these parts work together? So back to our example here. So block level elements, there are things like divs, paragraphs, headings. These are things that start a new line. They take up the entire width of their parent container. And if you were to outline them, they look like blocks. They stack on top of each other. So in my code, for these block level elements, I'm putting a border on them and a background. And so when I refresh, you can see that here's the content, but it actually, this element goes all the way across the screen. And if I were to make this bigger, it continues to be 100% of its parent. You can change that, but by default, that's what it is. Now, on the other hand, we have inline level elements. These are things like anchor tags, span, code, buttons. These don't start a new line, they're in line. They only take up enough space to display their content. So now, through the magic of CSS, I'm adding a border and a background. And you can see here's a little span tag, an anchor tag, and code tags. And they're just living their best life right inside that block level element. Now, how do these elements work together? Oops. So if you go into your browser dev tools, you'll see this handy little diagram. So you have your content in the middle, and these numbers just represent the size it is as you're inspecting it. Then you have padding, which is the amount of space within an element. You have your border, and then you have your margin, which is the amount of space between your element and the elements around it. So for block level elements, the ones that take up the full width of their container, padding and border and margin will cause other elements to be pushed away on all sides. And I'm going to add a little padding real quick here, just 1 rem. And you'll be able to see how it's making space all the way around, top, bottom, left, right. And there are margins on these paragraph tags. And there's another little thing, I don't have time for it in this talk, but I want to point out that if your margins aren't as wide as you're expecting them on your block level elements, that might be a thing called margin collapse. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, for inline level elements though, you can have horizontal margins and padding, but vertical ones are a little bit different. So first let's look at the horizontal. So this is just a shorthand, and I'm saying top and bottom is 0 and left and right is 1 rem. And so if I refresh this, you can see, so they're pushing out, they're giving themselves a little bit more space. But if I say that I want the top and bottom to also be 1 rem, it's not going to behave the same way as a block level element. It applies and it exists there, but it doesn't actually move. It doesn't actually push away. And this is something that can really frustrate people when they're expecting it to behave the same way. Just know that it's not going to have any effect. This anchor tag isn't going to be pushing away from the other content because it behaves in a different way. So if you're ever adding space, adding padding or margin to elements and you're not sure what's going on, look for margin collapse and look to see if it's an inline element. So I hope learning about the cascade, specificity, and the box model are going to help you the next time that you're trying to make sense of your project styles. It can be a lot to think about, but CSS doesn't need to be frustrating.
Oh, thank you, Leanne. You talked about breakpoint style. What is a breakpoint style?
So
those of us who aren't front-end savvy.
Yeah, so sometimes you have things that apply to no matter how big your browser is. And sometimes you have things that you only want to apply at different points. So the width of your browser, so they call it a breakpoint. So you have, so this is 56M or 640 pixels. So if I had this component and I want it to be 100% on mobile, and then I only want it to be 50% when the screen's a little bit bigger, and then 33% later, this is kind of, I don't know that you would label it this way, but you could. So I'm going to put it here real quick, just to show you. Class, some component, and we don't need the period. All right, so So now you can see it's kind of getting smaller as my browser window gets bigger. And so you're just saying that at different size browsers, you want different things to happen. It could be something basic like the size of it, or, you know, the backgrounds could change color, or yeah, or it could disappear. Sometimes that's a way that we hide or show content, because you don't want things showing on mobile, but you do on desktop or vice versa.
Okay. Do you have a favorite CSS framework?
No, not really. I kind of like getting my hands dirty and just doing it. Yeah. I do like working with Sass, and I've been in a Gatsby project for the last year and a half, and we're not using Sass in that. And Sass is really cool because you can you nest things, and you're saying that I want this to apply, and you're getting a lot of that specificity baked in. So I do kind of miss working in Sass. That was pretty cool.
Nice. Did you teach yourself CSS and HTML? Are you
I
a self-learner too?
I did, yeah. My story is similar to Jen's. I was playing around on the code, like on the web, and figuring these things out. And I feel like my first big breakthrough was changing the color of a font and being like, oh my gosh. And I pulled somebody else into the room and I was like, look what I did. And they were like, okay. Yeah. So lots of online tutorials and figuring stuff out. And then once I got a job, and then talking to other people who had more experience than I did, and learning from them and bouncing things off of them. And yeah.
What makes CSS your favorite language? I have to admire that, because it is definitely not my favorite language.
I love that there's so much that you can do, especially it keeps growing now that there's things like Flex and Grid, and that you can get really creative with it. And I've never done this, but people create whole pictures just by building out, you know, different divs with different border radiuses and things. And but it's I just think it's a really cool experience when you come up with your own idea, or you have something that a designer's like, let's do this thing, and then you're like, okay, and how do I figure it out? And I get that with other languages, but I think there's something about it being visual
Yeah,
that makes it more exciting than, oh, I printed out something in my console. Oh, look at compiling something is like, yeah, it worked, but it's not been quite as cool.
not the same.
Yeah.
Would you be able to drop a link to that specificity?
Yes.
I have to say that very slow, into the chat.
Yes, you have to be careful,
super useful.
because if you say it with the wrong emphasis.
Yeah. I'm going to talk very slowly. All right. Do we have any other questions for LeeAnne before we move on? That's it. Well, thank you, LeeAnne. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
Wait, where is that link going?
I'm going to put it in the chat to everyone in just a second.
Oh, okay, sorry.
In the
Okay,
Zoom chat. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All righty. Well, while she's doing that, we will move along to our next speaker, who is Sierra. Sierra is a consultant at Atomic Robot here in Cincinnati, and she's focused primarily on native Android solutions. She loves building beautiful and accessible apps, sharing knowledge with the community, and mentoring aspiring mobile developers. She serves as a director of Women Who Code Cincinnati, as well as a global track lead for Women Who Code Mobile. And her talk is going to be about MLKit.
A lot of pressure coming off Jennifer's and LeeAnne's talk, pressure's on, I'm ready to go. But yes, I think most of you know me from my very long introductions at the beginning of our meetings, changing it up, putting on my speaker pants, and instead of begging everyone else to give talks for us, showing that anyone can in fact do it. I am really excited to talk about MLKit. It is one of my favorite packages to explore. And from my personal experience, it is very approachable for the average mobile developer like myself to get started quickly, easily, good documentation, easy APIs. And so I'm really excited to share how you can get started and all the cool features that you can use. So first question, what is MLKit? MLKit brings Google's machine learning expertise to mobile developers in a powerful and easy to use package. Some things to think about when you're getting started is first that it is optimized for mobile. MLKit's processing can happen on device and offline and keep all your images and text on the device. So no network calls needed. This means that we can do really fast processing, and also it unlocks real-time use cases like processing input directly from your camera. It's also built by Google, which means you can take advantage of the machine learning technologies that Google also uses to power their own mobile experiences. But I think that the more important takeaway for a hobbyist mobile developer is that it is built. And so you can get started without needing to know very much machine learning at all. And then finally, per their documentation, it is easy to use. And so you can tell me by the end of this talk whether you agree or disagree with that. And so what can MLKit do? MLKit is broken up into two different sets of APIs. First, we have our vision APIs, and then we also have our natural language APIs. So inside our vision APIs, we have things like facial recognition, barcode scanning, so you could build your own personal Kroger app, selfie segmentation, so you can build your own personal Snapchat, object tracking, text recognition, pose detection, if you want to build your own exercising app, digital ink recognition, and image labeling. On the side of the natural language APIs, we have things like language ID. It can tell you what kind of language that you're looking at by like holding up your camera. Entity extraction, which is like when you get text messages and it says, let's meet at this location at this time, it can pop up and say, hey, do you want to add that to your calendar or take directions there? So you can implement that inside your app. Smart reply, so that you can also have terrible LinkedIn suggestions whenever you get fun messages from recruiters. And also on-device translations. So just a whole host of things that can really open the door to building really powerful and customized apps. And so the next question is, who can use it? And the important answer is that everyone can. It is available for both iOS and Android. So while I am an Android developer and we will go very heavily down that path of implementation tonight, it is also available for iOS, which means that you can also potentially pull it into production apps because it is a Google product that will have parity between those two platforms. It is also available now for Flutter projects with Firebase ML in the Flutter pub library. So now that we've gone through that background, let's get started. Tonight, we're going to help our client, Steve. Here's a picture of Steve on his tractor. Some fun facts about our client. Steve is my father. He really likes to garden, and he really likes plants a lot of things and cannot always remember what all those things are. After many, many years, he finally understands what I do for a living and can tell people what my job is as a mobile developer. And so he asked us tonight if we can write him an app. And he really loves the tractor. So with the MLKit, the answer is yes, and we can do it in the next few minutes. So we're going to use the image labeling from our vision APIs to build an app to help Steve identify his plants in real time. For folks who maybe are less familiar with Android, here's a quick overview of some of the vocabulary that we're going to use and what we're going to do tonight. So some background on Steve. He screenshots everything that you send him on Snapchat and sends lots of family photos. So I know he has enough pictures to last a lifetime. And so all we're going to do is build a very simple single activity application that lets Steve pick pictures from his photo library and then process them and display a list of labels. We're not going to spend much time talking about the architecture or the UI, namely because there is no real architecture in this app. In this case, we've put everything inside our activity, and you can think about the activity of a mobile application. It's kind of like the main class in a Java app. It's kind of like gets everything started. And so that's going to hold all of our logic and control the UI. As far as our UI, we've already built it out, and we have a constraint layout that's going to constrain our different UI elements with relative to each other. And so we're going to have an image view to show the image that he selected. We're going to have a recycler view, which is the list element of Android to hold all our labels. And then we're going to have a couple buttons just to guide them with how to use it. So now that we have all that good to go, how are we actually going to use the image labeling API? So in Android, we use Gradle to manage our dependencies. So in this case, there are two different ways that you can add these libraries to your application. The first one is actually going to pull the model onto and load it with your application. And the second is a remote option where it can download it from Play Store. Within that option, you can either choose to download it when it needs it or download it when the app installs. This second way can make your app size a little bit smaller, but it also depends on network availability to have that model available for your users. Since we're building this for Steve and he's technology challenged, I have opted with the first one to just go ahead and package that with our application so that it's all there when he has the app already loaded. We're also going to use the base model for the image labeling library. This base model has 400 different labels that we can use out of the box. It's built to be really general and a varied list so that regardless of what kind of application that you're pushing it into, you can always get back some kind of meaningful labels, hopefully within reason. And so this is a couple of examples of the different kind of words that it can recognize in the images. So step one is going to be to get and prepare our image input. So the first step that we're going to take is to add the code to let Steve pick an image from his photos. And so we're going to do this by starting an intent for result or start an activity for result. And so that code's at the top of the screen. And so we're going to tell this function that we're going to do the type image to go get an image from his library and that we need to get content. And so it's going to be an intent of type action get content. And then we start up that activity, start activity for result, which is going to go and know where to go look for his images and bring that back to our app. So it's going to get that content for us. When that comes back, it's going to call this function on activity result. And so inside this function, all we have to do is check that the request code that we passed in, which we can just make up as some integer, and that it comes back correctly. So we have that result okay. And then the only thing that will come back from that is a packet of data that has the image URI inside of it. And so we pull that image URI right out of the data packet that comes back and we send that to our next function. And so the next thing that we're going to do is take this image URI and transform it into a bitmap. Why are we going to need a bitmap? So this is going to end up being one of several different ways that we can use to generate our image input and process it through the image labeling API. It's also something that most people are familiar with is what a bitmap is. And so it helps people get started. On a side note that you can find out later, it also happens to give us the best performance in the image labeling API. And so that's a win-win for us. And so we can transform our image URI from our activity result into a bitmap using our bitmap factory, and then return that back to our original function. And then in addition, we also set our preview so that we can see our image on our mobile device. So now that we have this bitmap, now we can actually use our MLKit APIs. So the first thing that we're going to do is convert that bitmap into the image input that the image labeler needs by calling this input.fromBitmap, and we pass in our bitmap and also the 0. The 0 is going to represent the amount of rotation that we need for it to turn it into the image input. In this case, we're just going to do 0. We're going to assume no rotation is needed. So next, then we're going to create our labeler using the default options from MLKit. We could also make our own image labeling options, and some things that we could pass in are like a confidence threshold. So if we only want to see things over 75% confidence, we can create our own image labeler options and build that in. Finally, now that we have our labeler and we've passed in our default options, we can actually pass in our image input into the labeler.process function. This labeler.process function is going to return a task, and that task is going to return sometime in the future. So it will finish eventually, and it's going to return to us a list. And so to handle that future list that we're going to get back, we're going to add on our on-success listener for when it works and we get back a list. And we're going to add on an on-failure listener for when it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, we're just going to throw a toast message up to let Steve know that it's not working. And so in this case, we're going to get back this list of labels when we successfully return that task. And we're just going to pass that list of labels into a recycler view adapter to display it on our screen in that list view. And so that's all we really need to do to finish up our app. Inside that adapter, we're going to bind each of those list items to our adapter rows. In this case, each image label that MLKit is going to return to us is going to return a text, a confidence, and an index. The text and the index are actually the same thing. When you get that list of the base model, every word has both an index and a word. So those are just two different ways to display the same information. And so once we bind this up, we're good to go. And with that, our app is ready to go. And so we can see in this quick preview, we can go in and select our image. We have this great picture of Steve's backyard, process it, and we very quickly return our list that includes words like flower and petal and garden and plant, and also some really fun words that Steve would love, like jungle and forest, knowing that that is how Google is fairly confident his backyard should be described. So with that, we built this app in 10 minutes. Amazing. Where can we go from here? So while Steve will love his yard being described as a jungle, we're still kind of far off from that real-time flower labeling app. And so the next step would probably be building out a custom model to label plants individually. We also required him to use the camera or use the images to run the processing. So the next step might also be to use the camera so he can just move his phone around and identify in real time and take advantage of some of those MLKit on-device processing APIs. We might want to overlay the image with labels so that we know which plant MLKit is labeling at a given time. And we also might want to rewrite our app in Jetpack Compose. Jetpack Compose is a really cool UI framework that just came out in Android that I am personally really excited about and completely convinced that I need to rewrite all of my example apps again. And finally, and the hardest, I have to convince my dad to use an Android phone so that he can actually use what we built for him tonight. And so with that, my final reminder, anytime we talk about machine learning is with great power comes great responsibility. In this case, we're using a model that we did not train and we don't know how it was trained. And so we always need to be mindful of the bias that can be baked into any learned model and the impact that it may cause on your user base. All of this code is available on my GitHub if you want to dive into it. My GitHub username is Sierra OBryan, and I have a pinned repo of examples, and this is inside of it along with these slides. You can also find me. I am always happy to talk about Android or Women Who Code Cincinnati, either one. I'm always down to chat. I'm on Twitter @ Sierra OBryan, or a whole host of ways to get in touch with me at sierraobryan.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Sierra. A question for you. So that when you just drop MLKit in and use it, you said it comes preloaded with like 400 different tags. So
The
you can
base
only
model
get
does.
back those that it's preloaded with.
Unless you use a custom model, or you can go out and find a lot of pre-made models on TensorFlow Hub. There's some criteria that you can like limit it down to ones that are TensorFlow Lite, so they work on the mobile apps. And then you can upload those right into your app also if you need like something more specific.
Okay. Okay. How hard do you think it would be to make an app that could actually recognize an exact plant? And you take a photo and it's like, that's a petunia.
The hardest part would be training that model. To train one of those models, they recommend hundreds of photos.
Yeah.
And so it would mostly be time consuming to create a full library of plants. But once you do that, there's a really great tool, Model Maker, that you just like upload a zip file of all your photos, and it will take the file names, train the model on it using transfer learning, and spit you out a TensorFlow Lite model that is very easy to put right into your app.
Nice.
So.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any more questions for Sierra?
Hey Sierra, I was just curious, like you used that Android library to do like captured photos. Would it be possible to do like streaming video, like live recognition with that same library, or is there other like related libraries that do that?
To do it like through the camera,
Mm-hmm.
I know the answer for doing it through the camera.
Uh-huh.
You use like you use Camera X, and then you also use an image analyzer to build, and then you like connect those two together.
Uh-huh.
And the hardest part of it is actually just getting the bitmaps to convert from the live stream into what it needs.
Uh-huh.
And I actually have that on a branch out in that repository if you want to go and look at it. So that has also been done.
Awesome.
But the code isn't super hard. I stole the conversion for the bitmap from a Google example because I didn't want to write it, but that was the hardest part.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
All righty. Thanks, Sierra. We'll go ahead and move along to our last talk for the night.
I'm sorry. I just want to ask one question.
You're fine.
This might be a dumb question, but what framework are you using to build this in? Because I've never seen anything like this. I'm learning Java right now, and
so that was just all inside the Android framework.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It could go. This question could go very in depth or like be very surface level, right? So if you wanted to get started with an Android app, most of the time you download Android Studio, and they can just like give you most of the framework for the application itself. So like it will give you a Gradle file, it will give you your base activity, and you could immediately run that and get something, an empty app. And then all the code that I talked about would just goes right inside that empty activity class. And then it's written in Kotlin. You said you were learning Java. Kotlin is a different JVM language. And so it's kind of it has less boilerplate than Java. Android used to actually be written completely in Java. And so that's actually what I learned first as well.
Okay, cool, thanks.
All right, so to wrap up our evening, we will move on to LaShonda. LaShonda is a graduate of Cable Academy's Full Stack Web Development Bootcamp and is a current student at their Cybersecurity Bootcamp. That sounds super cool. She recently finished a front-end internship at Jeff Weiler and has had the chance to really dive into some JavaScript frameworks and hone more skills. So her talk tonight is going to be an intro to Three.js. Turn it over to you, LaShonda.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is the Three.js website. And at first glance, it shows a lot of different projects that has Three.js implemented into it. And basically 3JS is a JavaScript framework that you can use to render 3D objects into the browser. And you can make games, 3D worlds, or pretty much anything that you want, which is why I like it. And as you can see, this person made an interactive galaxy looking person using 3JS. And so I'm going to give you guys a quick demo on 3JS, and we're going to make a cube spin in the browser. So you can click on to the documentation, and it's going to walk you guys through on how to set up your files for 3JS. So with this one, they just do it all in an HTML file, but I personally like to separate my files. So in my Visual Studio Code, I set up my HTML file. It's gonna be pretty much empty. You're gonna have one of your JavaScript files linked to the HTML document. And this top script right here is a CDN. It basically brings in 3JS, so then you don't have to download anything. And I got this link from cdnjs.com. And you want to make sure you got the right version, or else you will not see anything in the browser and spend 3 days wondering why nothing is showing up. And so, yes, I just copied this script tag and pasted it into the HTML document. So that's pretty much all you have to do with the HTML. And I also linked a CSS file to it because you want to set the body margin to 0, or else it will look weird. I'll show you guys what will happen if you don't have the body on 0 and overflow on hidden. And I also set the canvas that we'll be working on to 100% for both the width and the height. And so, yeah, that's pretty much all you'll do with those 2 files. Everything else is empty. It all really happens inside of the JavaScript file. And so back over here. So first things first, you're going to create a scene, a camera, a renderer, and also, since we're just making a shape, I called on cube as one of the let variables. So basically, before, like it says here, before to display anything with 3JS, you need to add the scene, camera, and the renderer so that you can see what's going to be on the browser. And so first you want to set scene to new 3.scene and camera. We're going to be using the perspective camera. The simplest term or definition for it is basically its point of view is how the way a person would see this cube floating and spinning in the air. And the first values for the perspective camera, the first attribute is called field of view. It goes more into depth with it. It's going to be the extent of the screen that is seen on display when the person is looking at it at that given moment. The second one is aspect ratio. You always want to make sure that the width is divided by the height, or else you're going to get a squished looking image and it won't look good. And then the last 2 attributes are basically just anything that's outside of the field of view that you set to with these will be cut out. You won't see like any unwanted things on the scene. And then the renderer is what we use to render the 3JS into the HTML document so we can see everything on the screen. And so that this goes faster, I'm going to copy and paste this into my JavaScript file. And I called these variables up here, so I won't need to use const. It definitely saves a lot of time. And yeah, so that's our first, what we do first is set up 3JS, and then next we're gonna set up the geometry and the material for the cube. And basically this just calls on the geometry in 3JS that lets it know that we're gonna be making a shape with it. And we also call on the cube. So then it goes through its 3JS library and it formats the cube for us. And we call on both geometry and material. So then all that shows up on the cube. So yes, and we also set the camera position on a Z axis to 5. You can set it to any number that you want. The bigger the number, the further it'll be away from, the further the camera will be away from the object. And I'll show you guys that after I load it in. And also this, you can use a color or you can use a texture on your cube, and I'll show you what a texture looks like later after I finish with this. And so before we're done, you're gonna see a black screen, which is good. That's probably the only time you'll want to see a black screen on the browser. So I'm not done yet, but there's a few more steps to get the cube to show up into the browser. And you can also make any other shapes that you want. This is just the starter. And then I'm gonna make a const variable called animate, and I'm gonna set it equal to a function so that I can request the animation frame and render it to the scene on camera. So then you can see the cube actually spinning and moving. Oops. And to actually see that everything is working the way it should be, for the motion of the cube, you're gonna have to set the rotation of the y-axis and the x-axis, which will be right here. We're gonna also put that into the animate function. That's weird, I got an error. Let's see if it'll stop if I add this into it. Okay, I guess I had a typo in it. I was kind of typing fast. And last but not least, we're gonna make sure that we call on the animate function. So then we actually see the cube moving in the browser. I'm kind of, I think I'm missing a step, but I have one that's ready. I haven't worked with this for a long time because I just recently started learning it, but it can be simple and it can be very complex. And the more, this is basically the cube that you would have seen. This is one with the texture. And the other one would have probably, that should have been here, would have been green or blue. But yes, this is what you would have seen. If it showed up in the browser, I'll double check it later and see what happened. But yeah, I'm more of a visual learner, so I like to see people do it through tutorials instead of reading from a document. But yeah, I can show you guys another project that I've learned using Three.js. And I made a portal by watching a tutorial, and it was Thanos inspired for his portal that he uses in the Marvel movie. And this was only made using just one small smoke PNG file. And yeah, I really like it. The more that you use it, the more you'll grow comfortable with it and not have to worry about something going wrong. But yeah, it definitely took a minute for me to learn some of this stuff and get it down. But yeah, it's really fun. The more that you use Three.js, you'll start getting exposed to other applications such as Blender. And Blender is basically used to make action movies, Disney movies. It's a really powerful tool that professional industries use. And so, yeah, that's what I've been doing for over the past month of messing around with Three.js. I probably should mess around with it more, but since I'm in the other cohort with cybersecurity, I have to make time for it. But yeah, it's a really fun tool, and I think people should start using it more.
I'm
Yeah.
so impressed when anyone live codes.
I agree. Live coding is so hard. So shout out
Listen,
to all you
listen.
live coders.
Yeah.
I was so nervous. I was like, why isn't the cube showing up?
Oh,
Well,
we wouldn't even have known. You just walked right through it,
I
and
was gonna say I would probably be in
awesome.
tears if it had my live coding wouldn't have worked.
It's okay. I came prepared. That's why I have the other cube ready. But yeah, I will definitely go back through it and try to figure out why it didn't show up. But yeah, I think I probably skipped over a step, but that's okay. But yes,
The const on your cube declaration on line 16. I don't, just since you had let cube.
oh, look at you. I can just get it. Oh,
there it is. Yes.
okay.
Amazing.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Okay, so thank you to whoever said that. I appreciate it. And I was telling myself to remember to take off the cons of the names that I put let variable on. So yeah, I guess I was a little nervous and I forgot. Thank you. Oh, and I can show you what I did to put the texture on. So with this one, this is just a color. They use a mesh basic material to wrap it around the cube. But if you want to use a texture, you can I have a folder called textures, and there's just a whole bunch of different basically pictures of what I can put on the cube. So yeah, I use the texture loader. I commented out the mesh basic material, so then this would show up. And yeah, I loaded in the textures folder and with the file lava tile. And then to get it to show up, you want to set map to texture. And yes, you can do a lot of things with Three.js, but yeah, that was just a very quick demo. And if you guys are interested, I can send a link of a playlist to watch into the chat, so then you guys can watch it and follow along with it.
Yeah, that would be great. If you could drop that link in the chat, I'd appreciate that. Thank
I
you
sure
so
will.
much.
Is there questions?
Too well prepared. You explained everything.
So have you just been doing this for fun for the past month, or is this for your job?
I've been doing this for fun. I like learning new things. So, and also I I learned about Three.js because I was watching a video about this guy reviewing people's portfolios that they made online, and I seen that what this guy made, and I was like, I want to do that. So I started to learn it. There we go. And I'll just how do I okay, there we go. Now I see.
Yeah, everything disappears while you're sharing.
But yeah, there we go. That's the playlist that I use. A note of advice, skip video 4. I spent a day trying to figure out why my stuff wasn't working. It's that video is outdated. You'll learn Blender in like the 7th video. But yes.
Always a test with every tutorial. Is this going to work with my current environment?
I went digging around because not many people use Three.js, which I was pretty surprised. So yes, I took one for the team. You're welcome. You're welcome.